The sky above Sanctuary Prime had always been beautiful. Two golden suns moved slowly across the purple heavens, and the floating cities of the people shone like jewels made of glass. For 300 years they had known nothing but peace. They were gentle beings, tall and thin, with bodies that looked like they were made of living crystal. When they spoke, their skin glowed with soft colors. They had no word for war in their language. They had never needed one. Ambassador stood on the highest balcony of the Grand Spire, watching the sunset paint the methane seas below in shades of orange and red. She was old by standards, nearly 400 years, and she had spent most of her life speaking to other species across the galaxy. She knew the Galactic Alliance well. She trusted them completely. The Alliance had promised to protect all member worlds, and they had believed that promise with all their hearts. That belief died when the swarm appeared in the sky. At first thought it was a cloud, a dark shape moving across the stars, blocking out the light of the twin suns. Then she saw it move. Then she saw it was alive. Thousands upon thousands of ships, but they were not made of metal. They were creatures themselves, massive living things with shells like insects and wings that stretched for kilometers. They did not build their fleet. They grew it. They were it. The first attack came without warning. A beam of green light shot down from the swarm and struck the eastern district of the capital city. The crystalline buildings did not burn. They shattered, watched as towers that had stood for centuries exploded into clouds of glittering dust. She could see the tiny shapes of her people falling through the air, their lights going dark as they died. She ran to the communications center. Her feet barely touched the ground. Around her, the city was screaming. They did not scream with their voices. They screamed with their light, their bodies flashing in patterns of terror and grief that hurt to look at. Children cried for their parents. Parents searched for their children. And above them all, the swarm kept coming. The communications center was chaos. Technicians worked frantically at their stations, trying to contact anyone who might help, pushed her way to the main console and activated the emergency beacon. This was the promise. This was what the Galactic Alliance had sworn to do. When a member world was in danger, help would come. The response came quickly. A calm voice, speaking the common language of the Alliance, filled the room. It was a Meridian officer, one of the elegant beings who commanded the Alliance's great silver fleet. The Meridians were the peacekeepers of the galaxy. Their ships were the most beautiful and the most powerful. Surely they would come. "We have received your distress call," the voice said. "The Meridian fleet is currently engaged in diplomatic operations in the outer sectors. Estimated arrival time, 47 standard cycles." Felt her heart stop. 47 cycles, nearly 50 days by counting. She looked out the window at the burning sky. The swarm was landing now, and she could see warriors pouring out onto the streets. They were horrible things, like insects crossed with nightmares, with too many legs and mouths that never stopped moving. "We do not have 47 cycles," said, and her voice was shaking. "We will be dead in 12. There was a pause. Then the Meridian voice spoke again, and it sounded almost bored. "We will make note of your situation. The Alliance extends its sympathy to the people. Please shelter in place and await rescue." The connection ended. Stood there staring at the silent console. Shelter in place. Await rescue. They were going to die, all of them, and the Alliance was offering sympathy. She thought of all the years she had spent representing her people, all the treaties she had signed, all the promises she had believed. None of it meant anything. When the darkness came, they were alone. Around her, the other had heard the message. Their lights were dimming. Hope was dying. Some of them simply sat down on the floor and waited. What else could they do? They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They had trusted others to protect them, and those others were not coming. Closed her eyes. She thought of her children, the generations of who would never exist because the swarm would consume them all. And then, in the darkness behind her eyes, she made a decision. She returned to the console and began to broadcast on all frequencies. Not just the Alliance channels, everything. Every signal, every wavelength, every corner of the galaxy that might be listening. She did not know who would hear. She did not care. Anyone was better than no one. "This is Ambassador of Sanctuary Prime," she said, and her voice was steady now. "We are under attack by the swarm. Our cities are burning, our people are dying. The Galactic Alliance cannot reach us in time. We are calling for help from anyone who can hear this message. Please, we have children here. We have elderly. We have done nothing to deserve this. If there is anyone out there, anyone at all, please help us." She repeated the message, again and again. She broadcasted until her voice grew weak and the swarm ships began to target the communication tower. Even as the building shook around her, she kept sending the signal out into the void. The signal traveled far. It passed through Alliance space, where the Meridians noted it and filed it away. It passed through neutral zones, where traders heard it and shook their heads sadly. It passed through quarantine zones, past warning buoys that blinked red in the darkness. The buoys carried messages in every known language: death world ahead, Class 12 gravity, extreme radiation, dangerous native species, do not approach. Beyond the warning buoys was a small blue and green planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. The beings who lived there called it Earth. The galaxy called them, and they were not members of any alliance. They had been rejected, feared, locked away behind quarantine lines because they were too strong, too violent, too dangerous to be trusted. On that small blue world, someone was listening. And when they heard cry for help, they did not file it away. They did not calculate arrival times. They did not offer sympathy. They started their engines. Admiral stood on the bridge of the TSS Endurance with her hands clasped behind her back. She was 62 years old, and her body carried the marks of a lifetime spent fighting. A scar ran down the left side of her face, a gift from the Titan insurrection 20 years ago. Her hair, once black as space, was now streaked with. Her eyes were dark and calm, like deep water that hid dangerous currents. The bridge around her was alive with activity. Officers worked at their stations, monitoring sensors and weapons and engines. The Endurance was not a beautiful ship. It was a weapon built for war, covered in armor plating and gun turrets. The Galactic Alliance would have called it ugly, called it home. Lieutenant approached her, holding a data pad in hands that would not stop shaking. Was young, only 25, with a round face and short hair that she kept tucked behind her ears. This was her first year on active duty. She had never seen real combat. Until today, she had never heard anyone die. Admiral said, "We intercepted a transmission. It came through the quarantine frequencies. Someone was broadcasting on all channels, trying to reach anyone who would listen." Took the data pad and listened to the message. The voice was strange, speaking the common galactic language with an accent she did not recognize. But the words were clear: cities burning, people dying. Children, help us, please. "It's genuine," said. "Though they're being attacked by something called the swarm. We ran the data, They're harvesters, they eat worlds, they consume everything and move on. The Alliance won't reach them in time." Listen to the message again. The voice belonged to someone named an ambassador. Could hear the fear in her voice, but also something else. Determination. This had not given up. She was fighting with the only weapon she had, her words, hoping that someone would hear. "How many people on that world?" asked. 8 billion, Admiral. Was quiet for a long moment. 8 billion lives. 8 billion beings who had never done anything to Earth, who had probably never even heard of Earth. The galaxy feared humans. The Alliance had rejected humanity 200 years ago, declared them too dangerous, too aggressive, too unstable. They had built quarantine zones around human space and left warning buoys to keep others away. Humans were monsters. Everyone knew that. Except the monsters were the only ones listening. Walked to the main communication console and opened a channel to Terran High Command. On the screen appeared General, an old man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much death. Behind him could see other admirals and commanders, all of them watching, all of them waiting. "You've heard the transmission," said. "It was not a question." "We've heard it," replied. "The council is debating what to do." "There's nothing to debate. They need help. We can give it." Sighed. "You know what they think of us out there. We're the ones they lock behind quarantine lines. If we show up with a war fleet, the Alliance will scream that we're invading, that we're proving every terrible thing they've ever said about us. And if we don't show up, 8 billion people die." The channel was silent, could see the struggle on his face. He was a good man, but he was also a careful man. He thought about consequences. He worried about the future. Did not have time for the future. She only had time for now. "Let me make this simple," she said. "I'm going to ask my crew. Every ship in the fleet, I'm going to ask them. Not order them, ask. If they want to go, we go. If they don't, we stay. That's it." Stared at her. "You're putting this on the sailors." "I'm giving them a choice. That's what we do. That's who we are." She closed the channel before he could argue and turned to face her bridge crew. They were all watching her, with her shaking hands. Lieutenant at the weapons console, a big man with gentle eyes. Ensign at navigation, barely out of the academy, her face pale with fear. Chief engineer in the engine room, listening through the intercom. All of them waiting. "You heard the message," said. "There's a world out there that's dying. They're not our allies. They're not even our friends. They're just people who need help, and we're the only ones close enough to give it. The Alliance won't come. No one else is coming, just us." She paused and looked at each of them in turn. "I'm not going to order you to do this. This isn't about duty. This is about who we want to be. If we go, some of us will die, maybe all of us. They are dangerous. They've destroyed 40 worlds. They've never lost a battle. Going after them is probably suicide." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had made peace with death a long time ago. "But I'd rather die trying to save people than live knowing I didn't even try. So I'm asking, do we go?" The answer came from every station, from the bridge, from the engine room, from the weapons batteries and the medical bay and the marine barracks. Across the fleet, on every ship, the answer was the same. Yes. 347 warships powered up their engines. The TSS Endurance took the lead, flanked by the Unyielding under captain and the Last Light under commander. Behind them came battleships and cruisers and frigates and corvettes, all of them painted in dark colors, all of them bristling with weapons. Lieutenant watched the stars streak past as they entered hyperspace. Her hands had stopped shaking. She did not know if she would survive what was coming, but for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be human. They were the ones who came when no one else would. The swarm had never known fear. For 10,000 years, they had moved across the galaxy like a wave of hunger, consuming everything in their path. 40 worlds had fallen to them. Billions of lives had fed their endless appetite. Their queen mother, the ancient consciousness that guided them all, had grown fat and powerful on the suffering of others. When they looked at Sanctuary Prime, they saw only food. Ambassador had stopped counting the dead. The communication tower had fallen, and she had fled to the refugee shelters beneath the city with thousands of other survivors. The shelters were dark and crowded. Pressed against each other, their lights dim with grief and terror. Children cried without sound, their bodies flickering weakly. The elderly sat in corners, their glow fading as they lost the will to live. Above them, they were feeding. Could hear the sounds through the stone walls. The screaming of metal as buildings were torn apart. The awful wet sounds of the swarm consuming everything organic. The heavy footsteps of warriors hunting through the ruins for survivors. She had given up hope. Her message had gone out into the void, and the void had not answered. She sat in the darkness, holding the hand of a child she did not know, waiting for the end. Then the ground shook. At first thought it was another attack, but this was different. This was not the focused destruction of the weapons. This was something hitting the planet's atmosphere at incredible speed. Something big, many somethings. High above Sanctuary Prime, space itself seemed to tear open. Ships poured out of hyperspace directly into the middle of the formation. Not one or two ships, hundreds of them. They were dark and angular, covered in weapons, and they moved with a speed and aggression that made the pause. The Queen Mother turned her attention to these newcomers. In 10,000 years, no one had ever attacked her swarm so directly. Most species ran. The few who fought did so from a distance, hopping to slow the swarm down before fleeing. No one jumped into the middle of a formation. No one except humans. Admiral stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display light up with enemy contacts. 3,000 surrounded her fleet. They were massive living creatures, their shells thick with armor, their bodies carrying weapons that could destroy cities. Her 347 ships looked very small among them. She smiled. "Open a channel," she said, "all frequencies." Lieutenant worked the console, and suddenly every ship in the system could hear his voice. The in their shelters, everyone. "This is Admiral of the Terran Armada," she said. "You have attacked a civilian population. You have murdered innocents. You have exactly one chance to withdraw from this system. Take it or die here." For a long moment there was silence, then the answered. It was not a voice. It was a psychic wave, a blast of pure thought that crashed against the minds of every living being in the system. The Queen Mother was laughing. The laughter was cold and hungry and utterly without mercy. It carried images with it. Images of worlds the swarm had consumed. Images of species that had tried to fight and been eaten anyway. Images of what they would do to these small, ugly ships and the soft creatures inside them. The Terran fleet did not retreat. They did not even slow down. "I'll take that as a no," said. "All ships weapons free." The first salvo tore through like it was made of paper. Terran weapons were not elegant. They were brutal. That fired chunks of metal at speeds that turned them into bombs. Missiles that carried warheads designed to burn through armor and explode inside. Energy weapons that could cut through organic material like knives through flesh. The swarm screamed, not with laughter this time, with rage. On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, Sergeant Major led the first landing party. He was 45 years old, built like a machine designed for violence, and he had been fighting since he was old enough to hold a weapon. Behind him came 200 Terran Marines, all of them wearing heavy armor and carrying guns that looked too big to lift. They crashed through on the way down, kicked open the hatch before the ship had even stopped moving, and he was firing before his boots hit the deck. Around him, the interior of the alien vessel was a nightmare. The walls were alive. The air was thick with ammonia and spores that would have killed any other species in seconds. The temperature was hot enough to cook meat. Kept fighting. The warriors were fast and savage, with claws that could tear through metal and jaws that could bite a person in half. They swarmed the Marines from every direction, pouring out of holes in the walls, dropping from the ceiling, rising from the floor. They expected the humans to break, to run, to die like every other species they had fought. The humans did not break. Private was hit by a warrior 3 times her size. It knocked her to the ground and raised its claws to finish her. She shot it in the face, pushed the corpse off her body, and kept fighting. Corporal lost his gun when a warrior ripped it from his hands. He killed the warrior with his knife, took its claws as trophies, and found another gun. Sergeant was impaled through the shoulder. She pulled the claw out, used it to stab the creature that had wounded her, and kept moving forward. 6 hours. That was how long they fought inside the first. 6 hours of constant combat in an environment designed to kill them. When it was over, 200 Marines walked out of the dying vessel. 163 of them were wounded. 12 of them would never walk again, but the was dead. And there were 2,999 more to go. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and blood and screaming metal. 3 days of dying and fighting and refusing to stop. They had never faced anything like it. They had fought countless species across 10,000 years, and all of them had broken eventually. All of them had given up. All of them had accepted death. The humans would not break. On the bridge of the Endurance, Lieutenant had not slept since the battle began. Her eyes burned. Her hands, which had shaken so badly during the first hours, were steady now. There was no room for fear anymore. Fear was a luxury for people who had time to feel it. She coordinated fighter squadrons, relayed damage reports, tracked enemy movements, and watched her friends die one by one. A beam hit the bridge directly on the second day. 3 officers died instantly. The console in front of exploded, sending shrapnel into her face and arms. She wiped the blood from her eyes, found another console, and kept working. Around her, damage control teams fought fires that seemed to spring up everywhere. Engineers sealed breaches in the hull while the void of space tried to suck them out. Medical teams carried the wounded to sick bay, which was already overflowing with the injured and dying. Admiral stood in the center of it all, calm as stone. She had not sat down since the battle started. She had not eaten. She had barely spoken except to give orders. Her ship was bleeding, and so was she. A piece of bulkhead had torn a gash in her arm, and the blood had soaked through 3 bandages. She ignored it. "Status on the Unyielding," she said. The answer came from a young officer whose name she could not remember. There were too many dead to remember names anymore. "Main weapons offline, Admiral. Engines at 30%. Captain is." "What?" "He's ramming them, ma'am." Looked at the tactical display. The Unyielding, a battleship that had served the Terran Navy for 50 years, was accelerating directly toward a command vessel. Its guns were silent, its shields failing, but its engines burned with everything they had left. Had aimed his ship like a bullet, and he was firing it at the enemy's heart. The impact was visible from orbit. The Unyielding hit the command vessel at full speed, and both ships vanished in a ball of light that burned brighter than the twin suns. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris. Closed her eyes for just a moment. Had been her friend for 30 years. They had fought together, laughed together, watched their children grow up together. Now he was gone, scattered across the void like dust. She opened her eyes. "Focus fire on the breach," she said. "Make his death mean something." On the ground, the fighting was even worse. Sergeant Major had lost count of how many he had killed. His rifle had run out of ammunition hours ago. He was fighting with a blade now, a heavy piece of metal designed for cutting through armor. It worked just as well on alien flesh. Private was still with him, though she was barely recognizable. A bioweapon had hit her during the second wave, eating through her left arm like acid. The field medics had amputated what was left, sealed the wound with combat foam, and sent her back into the fight. She was killing one-handed now, her face twisted with pain and fury. "You should be in medical," said during a brief pause in the fighting. "Medical is full," replied. "Besides, they need everyone who can still shoot." She raised her rifle and killed a warrior that had been sneaking up behind him, nodded and said nothing more. There was nothing to say. Nearby, field medic worked in a makeshift hospital that had been set up in a shelter. He had been awake for 72 hours. His hands, which had trembled with exhaustion 12 hours ago, now moved with mechanical precision. He had no time to think. Thinking would slow him down. He simply worked, moving from patient to patient, doing what he could with what he had. The wounded were different from human wounded. Their crystalline bodies did not bleed the same way. Their organs were arranged differently, had never treated a before in his life. He had never even seen one before 3 days ago. He saved them anyway. He watched medical feeds, read emergency data, and improvised solutions that should not have worked but did. When a child stopped glowing, he found a way to restart her heart with a combination of electricity and pure stubbornness. When an elder's body began to crack, he sealed the fractures with surgical glue and held the pieces together with his own hands until the healers could take over. 847 survived because of him. He would not know that number until weeks later. In the moment, he simply kept working, kept saving, kept refusing to let anyone die if he could prevent it. Commander held the last light in a defensive position around the refugee transports. Her ship had taken damage that would have destroyed any Alliance vessel 3 times over. Half her weapons were gone. Her shields had failed completely. She had sealed off entire sections of the ship because they were too damaged to save. But she held the line. Wave after wave came for the transports, and wave after wave died trying to reach them. Crew fought like demons, jury-rigging weapons and rerouting power and doing impossible things because the alternative was letting civilians die. On the morning of the 3rd day, Admiral led a strike team onto the Queen Mother's ship. She took 50 Marines with her, the best she had left. They cut their way through the living corridors, fighting every step, losing people with every meter they advanced. The Queen Mother was waiting for them in the central chamber. She was enormous, a mountain of flesh and chitin and hate, surrounded by her personal guard. She had lived for 10,000 years. She had ended civilizations with a thought. She looked at these small, broken humans and felt nothing but contempt. Walked toward her alone. Her armor was shattered. Her arm was broken. She had a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other. The Queen Mother laughed again, that cold psychic wave of amusement. Shot her in the head. The shot did not kill her immediately. It took 3 more shots, and then the knife, and then her bare hands. When it was over, stood in a pool of alien blood, breathing hard, surrounded by the bodies of creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for. The swarm felt their queen die. 3,000, all connected to her mind, suddenly felt the connection go silent. They panicked. They fled. They scattered into deep space, running from the who had done the impossible. The skies above Sanctuary Prime were quiet for the first time in days. The battle was over. 2 days after the battle ended, the Meridian fleet arrived. Their ships were beautiful, silver and white, gleaming like jewelry against the darkness of space. They moved with the grace of dancers, forming perfect formations as they approached Sanctuary Prime. On their bridges, Meridian officers wore spotless uniforms and spoke in calm, measured tones. They were the protectors of the galaxy. They were the peacekeepers of the Alliance. They had come to help. They were too late. Admiral stood on the observation deck of the Endurance, watching the Silver Fleet approach. Her arm was in a sling. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood that was not entirely her own. Behind her, the surviving ships of the Terran Armada held formation around the planet they had saved. Of the 347 ships that had followed her into battle, 212 remained. 135 warships were gone, either destroyed completely or too damaged to repair. 43,000 Terran soldiers had died in 3 days. 43,000 sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, parents and children. They had given everything. And they had won. The Meridian Admiral contacted her within minutes of arrival. His name was something long and musical that did not bother to remember. His face was narrow and elegant, his expression a careful mask of concern that did not reach his eyes. "Admiral," he said, "you are not authorized to enter this system. The quarantine protocols clearly state that Terran vessels are forbidden from leaving designated space. You have violated multiple Alliance regulations. You have interfered with an internal Alliance matter. This is completely unacceptable." Stared at him for a long moment. She thought about ramming his ship into the enemy because his guns had failed. She thought about fighting one-handed in the ruins of a city. She thought about saving lives with nothing but determination and skill. She thought about all the people she had lost. "Are you done?" she asked. The Meridian blinked. "Excuse me. I asked if you were done, because if you are, I have wounded to care for, dead to honor, and a planet to help rebuild. I don't have time for your regulations. You cannot simply ignore Alliance authority. There will be consequences. There will be investigations. You will answer for this." Smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Send your investigators, send your lawyers, send whoever you want. We'll be here helping the people you abandoned." She closed the channel. On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, Ambassador walked through the ruins of her city. The crystalline spires that had once touched the sky were shattered now, reduced to glittering fields of broken glass. The floating platforms had fallen. The beautiful gardens had burned. Everywhere she looked, she saw destruction. But she also saw life. Terran soldiers moved through the ruins, not as conquerors but as helpers. They carried survivors to medical stations. They shared their food and water with hungry refugees. They stood guard against any remaining threats, their weapons ready but their faces kind. Sergeant Major sat in a circle of children, teaching them a game that involved clapping hands. The children did not understand the rules, but they were laughing. Their lights flickered with joy instead of fear. It was the first time they had laughed in days. Private stood nearby, her left sleeve empty and pinned to her shoulder. An elder approached her slowly, their body glowing with soft colors that could not read. The elder reached out and touched her remaining hand, and though neither of them spoke the other's language, something passed between them. Gratitude, understanding, connection. Field Medic was still in the hospital, still working, though other doctors had begged him to rest. He was teaching the healers what he had learned about human medicine, and they were teaching him about their own methods. Together, they had saved more lives than either could have alone. Lieutenant walked beside, serving as an unofficial guide and translator. Her face was now marked by the shrapnel that had nearly killed her during the battle. She wore those scars without shame. They were proof of what she had survived. "Why did you come?" asked. It was the question that had haunted her since the moment the Terran fleet appeared. "You owe us nothing. The galaxy fears your kind. The Alliance rejected you centuries ago. Why did you risk everything for strangers?" Thought about the question. It was a good question, a reasonable question, the kind of question that the Meridians and their allies would never understand. "Because you asked," she said finally, "and because we could." That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. They walked in silence for a while. Above them, the twin suns were setting, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful despite everything. Life was beautiful, even when it was broken. Admiral found them near what had once been the Grand Spire. She moved slowly, her injuries weighing on her, but her eyes were clear and strong. She stopped in front of and offered a small bow of respect. "Ambassador," she said, "on behalf of the Terran Republic, I want you to know that we did not come for reward or recognition. We came because someone was in trouble and we could help. That's all. That's everything." Felt tears forming in her eyes, strange liquid tears that her crystalline body had never produced before. She had spent her whole life among the species of the Alliance, learning their customs, speaking their languages, believing their promises. None of them had ever shown her what these had shown her in 3 days. "The Alliance calls you monsters," she said. "They say you are dangerous, violent, untrustworthy." Nodded. "They do. They are wrong." Turned and looked at the survivors gathered behind her. Thousands of the last remnants of a once great civilization standing among the ruins of their world. They were broken, they were grieving, but they were alive. "The High Council will meet tomorrow," she said. "I will propose that we leave the Galactic Alliance. I will propose that we request formal relations with the Terran Republic instead." His expression did not change. "That's a big decision. The Alliance won't be happy." "The Alliance let us die. You did not." Straightened her body, and for the first time since the attack began, her light burned bright and strong. "We will not forget what you did here. None of us will ever forget." Within a month, the formally from the Galactic Alliance. Within a year, 14 other species followed them. Worlds that had been abandoned by the Meridians, left to face disasters and invasions alone, reached out to the instead. The humans accepted every request for help. They asked for nothing in return. The Galactic Alliance watched with growing unease as their former members turned to the species they had locked behind quarantine lines. The Meridians demanded explanations. They threatened consequences. They warned that the humans were dangerous, that trusting them was foolish, that something was wrong. But the galaxy was beginning to understand something that the Alliance never had. They were not monsters. They were not conquerors. They were not the mindless killers that the Alliance had feared for 2 centuries. They were the ones who came when everyone else ran away. They were the ones who answered when no one else would. They were human. And that made all the difference.